Hello friends, today I am going to discuss about spinal trauma. Hope you all are very well and gradually adjusting to this unfortunate and uneasy calm and isolation in our lives. Nevertheless, I advise you to enjoy the solitude and keep on gradually learning the new topics and acquiring new information. So, coming back to spinal trauma. Awareness about spinal trauma and learning its basic aspect is very important for a healthcare practitioner, be it an orthopedic surgeon or a general surgeon or a general physician for that matter, because a basic knowledge of spinal trauma is must for an healthcare practitioner. As you must be knowing that unfortunately India has the highest number of deaths due to road traffic accidents, and a large number of these injuries involve spinal trauma. A spinal trauma may result in a spinal cord injury or injury to the vertebral column, which may result in severe compromise to neurologic structures, resulting in possible complete to partial paralysis, bladder or bowel dysfunction, various degrees of sensory disturbances, and may sometimes result in mortality. So friends, let us focus on spinal trauma and try to learn its basic aspects. Now friends, coming to learning objectives. As you all must be aware that I always start with applied anatomy, because investing in applied anatomy is a $1 million endeavor, because it makes your orthopedic concepts more precise. So today's learning objectives are: first, applied anatomy; second, mode of injury; third, concepts of stable and unstable injuries; fourth, mechanism of injury; then fifth, history and clinical features, followed by sixth, examination, which includes neurological examination; seventh, concept of a spinal shock. You should must know a bit about a spinal shock, because this is a very important concept which I will discuss later on. And eighth point is a spinal care by log rolling. Log rolling is a technique of giving nursing care to a spinally injured patient. And finally, investigations and treatment of spinal injuries. And in end, I will describe how should you approach to a patient with a spinal injury, so that you should not miss any important findings and you should be able to diagnose and treat in an optimal way. Coming to the applied anatomy part. Now let us revise about a typical vertebra. Typical vertebra consists of a vertebral body anteriorly and a vertebral arch posteriorly. The vertebral body is the major weight-bearing component of the bone, and fibrocartilaginous intervertebral discs separate adjacent vertebrae. The vertebral arch is firmly attached to the posterior surface of vertebral body by two pedicles, which form the lateral pillars of the vertebral arch. The roof of the vertebral arch is formed by right and left laminae, which fuse in the midline, and from this midline a spinous process projects posteriorly, and the region where the lamina meets the pedicle, a transverse process originates. Now this region where the lamina is meeting the pedicle is very important, not because of the attachment of this transverse process, but because of the attachment of the articular processes. A superior and one inferior articular process originates from this region, and these superior and inferior articular processes will articulate with similar processes of adjacent vertebra, and this way they make facet joints. Facet joint is also known as zygophyseal joints, and they are true synovial joints. So facet joint or a zygophyseal joint is formed by superior and inferior articular processes that project from the junction of pedicle and lamina, and they are oriented in oblique to coronal direction and more coronal as you move inferiorwards. They have very complex role in spinal movement, but at your level you should know a very important concept, that their plane is oriented in a coronal direction. So they are providing antero-posterior stability to vertebral column. Means one vertebra cannot move over other vertebra in an antero-posterior direction because of presence of these facet joints or zygophyseal joints, which, as I have already explained, that they are formed by superior and inferior articular processes. So in applied anatomy part of a spinal trauma, you must know about articular processes and formation of facet joints along with other important points. Now coming to next important topic in applied anatomy part, that is vertebral ligaments. Before that, word about the number of vertebra, that you must be aware that the total number of vertebra are cervical 7, thoracic or dorsal 12, then lumbar 5, sacral there are 5 vertebrae which are fused to form 1, and coccygeal again there are 4 vertebrae which are fused to form again 1. After that, now we should move to the vertebral ligaments. Knowledge of these vertebral ligaments is very important to understand the concept of vertebral stability or stability of the vertebral column. So these ligaments in anterior to posterior direction are anterior longitudinal ligament, which is shown in red color, thereafter annulus fibrosus of the disc, then posterior longitudinal ligament, which you can see in pink color, thereafter ligamentum flavum, though it is shown in blue color but actually flavum means yellow, so it is a yellow colored ligament. This is very important for spinal surgeons. And after that, ligamentum flavum comes interspinous ligament, which has been shown in green color, and finally the most posterior is the supraspinous ligament. So you must know and remember the orientation of these ligaments because they will dictate the stability of vertebral column. Now coming to mode of injury of a spinal trauma. These mode of injury are very easy to understand. The first one is fall from height. In our country, in our setup, there may be complaints of falling from a tree or falling from a ladder. The second one is road traffic accident. The third one is fall of heavy object on back, which is also known as miner's injury. In miner's injury, what happens is that these miners, they will be working in a bent position. Bent position means knee elbow position, and while working sometimes a heavy boulder or heavy stone falls on their backs and thus they suffer a spinal trauma. And the last one is a sports injury. So these are the common mechanism of sustaining a spinal trauma. Now coming to the concept of stable and unstable spinal injuries. This is a very important concept, and sometimes they may frame pre-PG examination questions also. So what is an stable spinal injury? A stable injury is one in which the vertebral components will not be displaced by normal physiological load, whereas an unstable injury is one in which there is a significant risk of displacement and damage to neurological structures. And damage to structures, as you all know, will result in varying type of neurological deficit like motor deficit, which you know by paresis or paralysis, or a sensory deficit, or bladder or bowel deficits. So initially there were lots of classification system proposed, and now the most well known and accepted classification is that of Dennis. So that is Dennis system of classifying stable and unstable injuries. It was given in 1983. So Dennis 3 column consists of anterior, middle and posterior columns. The anterior column comprised of anterior half of the vertebral body, anterior part of the disc and anterior longitudinal ligament. The middle column consists of posterior half of the body and the disc and the posterior longitudinal ligament. The posterior column consists of posterior vertebral arch consisting of transverse process, spinous process and the accompanying ligaments. So, a one column injury is mostly or always stable. Two column injury is unstable, and three column injury is invariably unstable. So, this you should know about the three column concept of Dennis and different types of varying degrees of spinal injuries as far as their stability is concerned. Now coming to mechanism of injury. There are three basic mechanisms of injury, that is traction or avulsion, then direct injury and indirect injury. So coupled with three basic mechanisms, the combination of acting forces on different directions and planes basically produces five mechanisms of injury which you should know. The first one is flexion injury, then flexion rotation injury, thereafter vertical compression injury, fourth one is extension injury, and finally flexion distraction injury. Now you go through all these mechanisms of injury one by one. I have highlighted the important points which you must know and try to understand these mechanisms in a very simplified way. Now friends, I hope you have understood all the theories associated with spinal trauma. Now this is the time to enter the clinical domain, that is how you should proceed with a spinal trauma patient in OPD or a casualty or emergency. So first thing is that history and symptoms. By this time you must be aware about mode and mechanism of injury. While examining a spinally injured patient, you should always maintain a very high index of suspicion. Means if the mode and mechanism of injury is consistent with a spinal trauma, always try to rule out a spinal trauma unless proved otherwise. So always maintain a high index of suspicion for a spinal trauma if mode and mechanism of injury are consistent with possibility of a spinal injury. Inquire about neck and back pain and try to elicit a spinal tenderness. In my view, eliciting a spinal tenderness is the soul of a spinal examination. Means you should be able to see in which spinal level there is a tenderness. Thereafter, you can proceed with neurological examination. If a patient is polytraumatized and unconscious, so eliciting a spinal tenderness may not be possible. So in these scenarios, always assume the possibility of presence of unstable spinal injury unless ruled out by relevant radiographic and other investigations. Now coming to the general examination part. The general examination part is not a very difficult one here. This is a very basic. It is ABC of ATLS. ABC stands for, which I am going to describe, and ATLS, as you all know, Advanced Trauma Life Support. Any trauma patient, for that matter, spinal trauma or any limb fracture or possibility of femur fracture, whatever, you should always proceed with ABC. A stands for airway maintenance and cervical spine protection. Means you should maintain the cervical spine in a straight line. You should not unduly flex the neck. If any possible cervical spine injury is present, it should not be aggravated. The B is the breathing and ventilation. See if patient is able to breathe or any foreign body or something is obstructing the airway. C stands for circulation and hemorrhage control. Try to see if any external bleeding is there or not. Try to control the external bleeding. See whether any hemorrhagic shock is there or not. If it is there, you should correct the hemorrhagic shock either by colloid or crystalloid or blood transfusion. D stands for disability and neurological assessment. means you should be able to find out how much patient is able to move his or her limbs if patient is conscious. And E for exposure and environmental control, means you should fully expose the patient. C for all external wounds, and try to maintain the temperature and other parameters, that is environmental control. So coming to the local examination part, your local examination, especially of back and spine, should be very meticulous. You should not miss any obvious findings. Most important is the external signs of any abrasion or contusion over neck or back. If any abrasion or contusion is present, it means that the underlying vertebra may have some injury. The second very important thing is spinal tenderness, which I have already described. Thereafter, look for any spinal deformity. Here you can see that the boy is having unduly prominent lower dorsal vertebra, so that is known as dorsal kyphosis. You should palpate all over the spinous process for any tenderness or any gap or hematoma or a step. So this way you should try to find exactly at which vertebral level there are significant clinical findings like any abrasion or contusion or a spinal deformity or a spinal tenderness or any other specific findings. Always remember that finding the most injured vertebra or most tender vertebra is very important. This is $1 million finding on which all your future investigations and plan of management will be based. Now coming to the neurological examination part. As you all know, the basic components of neurological examination, namely mental state examination, then cranial nerves, these both are not very important from ortho point of view. Thereafter comes bulk and tone of the muscles, muscle power, thereafter reflexes, coordination, sensory function, gait, etc. These basic neurological examination I am not going to discuss here. Here basically I will be focusing on level of vertebral and spinal injury. As you all know that in neonates, in newborns, the spinal cord ends at L3 or L4 level. Thereafter there is a differential growth of vertebral column against spinal cord, and in adults the spinal cord reaches up to the level of L1. It means that the most distal sacral and coccygeal segments of a spinal cord does not reach up to the sacral and coccygeal vertebra, but it reaches up to the level of L1. In other words, it means that the spinal cord level does not correspond with vertebral column level or vertebral level. After finding the injured vertebra, which I have already described, you should correlate and calculate the exact spinal level. Thereafter, your all investigations will be focusing on that level. How to deduce the spinal injury level? So I am going to explain that one. For calculating the spinal level, there is a rule of thumb. This rule of thumb is very important not only for your university exams but also for your pre-PG examinations, and it is also important for most of the clinical disciplines like emergency physicians, internists, orthopedicians. So you should never forget this rule of thumb. The rule is that for upper cervical vertebra, that is C1 to C3, there is no change in spinal level. For lower cervical vertebra, that is C4 to C7, you should add 1. For upper thoracic vertebra or upper dorsal vertebra, that is T1 or D1 to D6, you should add 2. And for lower thoracic vertebra, that is from T6 or D6 to D12, you should add 3. And all lumbar segments correspond to T10 and T11. And all sacral and coccygeal segments correspond to T12 to L1. And at L1 level, a spinal cord ends. So this is the rule you should always remember. Now let us do a little workup to understand this rule and the phenomena associated with this rule. So let us say that the patient has come and he or she has maximum tenderness at vertebral level C2. So what is the possible spinal cord level where injury may be there? So since C2 is upper cervical vertebra, you need not add anything, and the corresponding spinal cord level will be C2 itself. And if in another patient you have found out that maximum tenderness level is at C5, so C5 is at lower cervical level, so you have to add 1. So possible spinal cord level will be C6 here. And in another patient, if you have detected maximum tenderness at T3, so T3 is in upper thoracic level, so you have to add 2, and possible spinal cord level will be here T5. If you have detected tenderness at T8 level, and since T8 is in lower thoracic segment, so you have to add here 3 vertebra. So the spinal cord level will be T8 plus 3 is T11, and so on and so forth. So always you should remember this rule. This rule is very important whenever you need to deduce the spinal cord level from vertebral column level. Now coming to the second part of neurological examination. Here I will be discussing finding the spinal cord level based on clinical examination. Previously I talked finding the spinal cord level based on clinical tenderness or vertebral level. Now for this, that is finding the spinal cord level based on clinical examination level, you have to memorize some basic facts what I have depicted here. For example, elbow flexion corresponds to nerve root value C5, wrist extension corresponds to C6, wrist flexion and finger extension corresponds to C7. This chart you should remember, that is motor functions, and below is the chart for reflex values, that is biceps reflex corresponds to C5, triceps reflex corresponds to C7, quadriceps, that is knee jerk, corresponds to L3 and L4, L3 more predominantly, and Achilles tendon reflex, that is tendon jerk, corresponds to L5 S1, predominantly S1. So by clinical examination you should be able to deduce the spinal cord level, and then you should correlate the spinal cord level what you have found by clinical examination by eliciting vertebral tenderness. Same way you should be able to find out the sensory level also. Now after clinical examination and before moving to investigations and management, I would like to discuss two very important concepts. The first one is a spinal shock. Knowing about a spinal shock is very important, again for your university point of view and also for your pre-PG examination point of view. So what is a spinal shock? So you should remember some straightforward definition and facts. So the spinal shock is complete cessation of spinal cord functions, that is motor, sensory and reflex activity caudal to or below the level of a spinal cord injury. If any function is present, suppose a flicker of movement, even weak reflex, or patient is able to tell even a little bit of sensation, that means that a spinal shock is not present or a spinal shock is over. So you should always remember this very essential definition of a spinal shock, that is complete cessation of all the modalities of a spinal cord function, that is motor, sensory and reflex activity, and it is due to immediate depolarization of axonal membranes from kinetic energy of the injury. It is, of course, it is temporary, that is very important, and it should resolve within 24 to 48 hours, may sometime reach up to 72 hours, but it has to resolve. And you can prognosticate the actual extent of neurological injury only when a spinal shock is over. What it means? It means that if suppose a spinal shock is there, So patient won't be able to move any limb. There is no reflex activity. There is no sensation. So you don't know whether this paralysis is complete or not. It may look very grave at this stage. But when a spinal shock disappears, then only one will be able to predict the actual extent of neurological injury. So after discussion about a spinal shock, now we should move to the other important topic, that is concept of log rolling. Apart from medical sciences, this term may also be used into other different places. This term log rolling has originated from wood, the log of wood. Now the other place where log rolling is used is, the log rolling is a water sports and which is played in some parts of North America. And the other use of log rolling is in politics, where log rolling means the practice of exchanging favors, and we are least concerned about this political log rolling. So coming back to our medical log rolling, the meaning of our medical log rolling is that it is a maneuver to move a patient without flexing or twisting the spinal column or vertebral column. Where it is used, it can be used in the field to move the patient with suspected spinal injury from field to hospital. It can be used in hospital. This technique may be used inside operation theatre, and also most commonly it is used while giving nursing care to a spinally injured patient. Ideally 4 people are required. Mostly 3 people are sufficient to give this log rolling maneuver. Sometimes even 3 persons are not there, then at least 2 people are required to move the patient in a coordinated manner, so that there should not be any undue flexing or twisting movement of a spinal cord or vertebral column. If 4 people are there to give log rolling movement, then one person should hold head and neck of the patient, the other person should hold the shoulder and upper trunk, the third person should hold pelvis and thighs, and the fourth person should hold the leg region. If 3 persons are there, that is the most common scenario in hospitals. So one person should hold the head and neck, the other person should hold shoulder and upper trunk, and the third person will hold this pelvis and the lower limbs. Even this log rolling movement can be given by 2 people, but there should be very much coordination between them to avoid any possible injury to a spinal cord. Should always remember and understand this concept of log rolling. This is a very important concept for giving nursing care to spinally injured patients. Now after clinical examination, the next we should move on to the management part, which consists of investigation and treatment. So the first and the foremost investigation is X-ray. The biggest question here is that which part to be imaged by X-ray. Now for this, as I have already told, you should focus on the very meticulous clinical examination. You have to find out what is the level of spinal tenderness. You have to find out what is the level of a spinal cord by your clinical examination. For this, I will give you a simple example. Imagine that the patient after a spinal trauma coming with maximum tenderness at dorsolumbar junction. On neurological examination, you have discovered that the patient is not able to flex elbow. So elbow flexion is 0 or almost 0. Now you should know that elbow flexion is supplied by C5 nerve root, or the spinal cord level for elbow flexion is C5 level. So the corresponding vertebral column level will be C4. So apart from the dorsolumbar spine X-ray, which you are going to order because of dorsolumbar tenderness, you have to include the cervical spine X-ray also. Though there may not be significant tenderness at this point, there is a clinical examination finding is pointing towards some possible injury at C4 level. so you have to include the cervical spine also. So accordingly, you have to decide what is the region for which X-ray to be ordered, and the standard views are X-ray, spine, anteroposterior and lateral view. So depending on the region like cervical spine or dorsal spine or dorsolumbar spine or lumbar spine or lumbosacral spine, whatever the region you have deduced from your clinical examination, you order that region. The standard views are anteroposterior and lateral view. So X-ray is the first and foremost investigation for diagnosing a spinal injury, and invariably you will be needing one advanced radiological investigation to further proceed with your management plan. The other investigation, mostly it may be MRI or CT. Now other important question is that when to order CT or MRI. One important rule of thumb is that if any neurological deficit is present along with the fracture, the next investigation ordered is MR of the spine or MRI of the spine. If there is no neurological injury, you have diagnosed some amount of tenderness, X-ray may not be showing any fracture, so further elucidate this injury, the next line of investigation possibly is CT scan of that region. This is not an hard and fast rule, but at your level, this will guide your further understanding. So if any neurological deficit is present, the surgeon's next area of interest is to see the neural elements, that is the soft tissue, that may not be very much visible by X-ray or the CT scan. So if any neurological deficit is present, to see the neural elements, the next line of investigation is MRI. So this will guide you in taking further decisions regarding the next level of investigations. And finally, the last point of discussion is treatment plan. The decision regarding the treatment plan of a spinal trauma is a complex and complicated decision. To begin with, at your level, you should know the algorithm of the treatment decision of a spinal injury. The first is that emergency care. When patient lands in casualty or emergency, you should start with ABC of ATLS, which I have already discussed. Thereafter, you should know that there are two modalities of management of a spinal trauma, the conservative one and the surgical one. Conservative treatment starts with immobilization by some braces and bed rest. Thereafter, as the fracture heals, patient is further mobilized and rehabilitation started. Various braces are there, which I have shown in the photograph. The 1A and 1B is showing Taylor's brace, that is used for mobilization of dorsal and lumbar segments. The second ones are, that is figure 2A and 2B are SOMI brace, that is SOMI. S stand for sternum, O for occipital, M for mandibular and I for immobilizer. So sternal occipito-mandibular immobilizer. It is used for immobilization of cervical spine. The third photograph, that is 3A and 3B, I have shown for the surgical management of spinal injuries. In 3A, which is the lateral view of dorsolumbar region, which is showing wedge compression fracture of L2, that fracture has been managed by surgical means. The fracture has been reduced. You may not see the anatomical reduction, that is the maximum possible reduction you can achieve, so that any compression is there on the spinal cord, that may be relieved, and it has been fixed with 4 screws. You can see the 2 screws because the screw of the opposite side is overlapping with it. These are known as pedicle screws. So just you should know that these are the surgical way of managing the spinal injuries. Thereafter, the most important component of spinal trauma comes, that is rehabilitation. There are many components of rehabilitation like physical rehabilitation, social and psychological rehabilitation, and economic and vocational rehabilitation. Physical rehabilitation means patient should be able to do the activities of daily living independently. For this, patient may be needing calipers or wheelchairs, etc. The social and psychological rehabilitation of the patient is involved with keeping the morale of the patient high, so patient should feel like an active person in society. And finally, the economic or vocational rehabilitation should be simultaneous, so that when patient is discharged from hospital, patient should be gainfully employed and patient should contribute actively. So the treatment of spinal trauma is not complete unless all the parameters of rehabilitation optimally managed. We should not see the patient as a carrier of combination of traumatic disorders or diseases, but we should see the patient like a human being, so that our treatment decisions should improve the quality of life of the patient, and that is the only thing which finally matters. Now, before winding up this topic of spinal trauma, I am going to tell you a reasonable approach to spinal injury patients. So suppose patient comes to you with history of fall from height. You have assumed that there is a possibility of a spinal injury as per the mode and mechanism of injury. The first thing is that you have employed the ABC protocol. Thereafter, during the clinical examination, you have elicited tenderness at D7 level, and there is a decreased sensation at level of umbilicus and below. So if you analyze this D7 level of vertebral column corresponds to the D10 level of a spinal cord, and decreased sensation at umbilicus or below also corresponds to the D10 level of a spinal cord. So your clinical examination findings are corroborating each other. Because of the injury, there is a paraplegia, which means that complete paralysis of both lower limbs, and there is an exaggerated knee and ankle jerks. Because knee and ankle jerks are present, you have arrived at the conclusion that there is no spinal shock. So your clinical diagnosis is traumatic paraplegia with possible fracture of D7 with, if any bowel and bladder symptoms are there, you can add this in diagnosis. So what you are going to do? You are going to do an X-ray of the dorsal spine focusing D7, anteroposterior and lateral view. So here you can see that one, the X-ray has come back. Basically this is sagittal picture of a CT scan which is showing a fracture of the D8. Thereafter, the other decisions regarding spinal management has to be taken. Hope I am able to explain this topic of spinal trauma in a way understandable to you. Try to read as much as you can. There is no upper limit of hard work, and if still any doubt or query persists, you can send me your doubt and queries, which I will discuss later. Hope you have enjoyed the topic. Thank you very much.